Support for the program Humanize, Newcomers was provided in part by Rose Community Foundation and viewers like you.
My name is Jamie Torres. I am a City Councilwoman here in Denver. I represent West Denver District 3 and I'm our current council president. I grew up in the same district that I represent right now, so it was a lot of joy. There was a lot of poverty, but you didn't really know it because everyone around you was experiencing a lot of the same thing. I grew up next door to my grandmother with my mom and my sister, and so there was a lot of family around. There was a lot of friends who were family around, and so we had a lot of people that made up our entire circle. It was a real joy. Walked to school, friends within walking distance, rode bikes all day, you know, those kinds of childhoods, but also very difficult. A lot of alcoholism, a lot of just, you know, poverty. We were in food lines and going to churches a lot for support and leaned on our network a lot. I see it still present every day, and I actually saw it much more visibly during the pandemic in my district. So my district is still very Latino, it is still very working class, though starting to experience gentrification. And because of that, we were essential workers in my district. We were very vulnerable, very underinsured or uninsured. And so we felt a lot of the pandemic. And so I saw my district really rely on one another during that period of time, which is very similar to when I was growing up. And I watched my mom and her network of other single moms relying on each other. Social justice has everything to do with the work that's done around immigrant integration, around immigration, around the fight for a better and better performing system for all involved. So social justice is one of the things that I think underlies the activism to improve that system. It also underlies a lot of the work that's done to support immigrants who arrive here under a really broken foundation. My touch points for immigrants are always immigrants themselves and the people that are doing direct service. And not being an immigrant myself, not even being a native Spanish speaker, I rely heavily on individuals and their personal stories and their personal perceptions of what might be happening. And that's an important thing to me. My background is in anthropology, so I look also from a variety of lenses, including theirs, at the problem at hand as opposed to my own. In 2005, I founded the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs here in Denver. And I did that because I thought it was my responsibility to help prepare Denver to be a city that didn't extract people's culture and identity from them if they came from other places or spoke other languages. And it's because of what I saw happen to my grandmother in her time growing up here in Denver. There are a lot of stories that I look to that tell me a little bit more about what direction we should be going and how we should be doing things. I remember meeting refugees over the period of time that I worked in that office who would tell me their story, and I would try to get them on a path, knowing they'd be on that path for years before they heard back about a particular visa or process or even reunification with their family. My grandma, despite being born in Denver, Spanish was her first language and was disciplined for speaking Spanish in school. And so that set the stage for a lot of people who call themselves Chicanos in the Southwest, where a lot of our family were encouraged not to express their cultural identity, and their language was the primary one of those things. So she did not teach her kids Spanish. She didn't speak Spanish other than to other adults who spoke Spanish. And so we are 2 generations away from her now who don't speak Spanish. And I consider that erasure. I consider that a way of kind of removing cultural identity from a people. And so as I went along my anthropology journey, it's one of the things that I look to in terms of what kind of city do I want to be a part of and what kind of city can I help build. And one that valued those things was what set the stage for creating the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. I don't think it's well known, number one, that kind of story, because I find myself having to tell people it a lot for why an entire group of proud Latinos and Chicanos in Denver, Colorado, where else in the Southwest, why none of us speak Spanish or speak Spanish well. I had to learn it in school. It is one of the indicators that a lot of people don't talk a lot about this part of our history. It's a pretty important one, but there's a lot of shame tied up in it too, which could be why we don't offer it up as a conversation point. I do think it's one of the things that also bridges myself to what is currently happening in Denver, and why it's a constant flow of energy that comes through migration and immigration that continues to retell that story over and over and over again. And what we've tried to build and kind of correct course in Denver, that we weren't going to be a city that was going to ask you to assimilate, that we weren't going to be a city that was going to ask you to abandon things in order to fit in order to succeed, in order to find a community or a network. We know one-on-one the ways that some of the rhetoric isn't valid, right? That crime is actually lower among immigrant communities, that they are some of the fastest growing entrepreneurs in this country. Some of the small things that people can do to humanize this issue for themselves is to volunteer. It really takes very little effort, very little time out of your day to take yourself, your family, to a location where they might be feeding, where they might be sorting clothes, where they might be engaging in a legal night for our immigrant population, and watching the work that goes into the multifaceted kind of role of what welcoming looks like. Because it deepens, I think, an appreciation for the really complicated path any immigrant has to face when they come to the United States. I think there's a misperception out there that if only they wanted to work, would they be finding success? Only to realize in a legal clinic, they can't actually get a job in order to then be self-sufficient, in order to then be able to afford an apartment in the Metro Denver area, in order to then be able to send their kids to school and start on that path. And so we think about some of the most foundational needs that a family has, and to be a part of giving something to that equation is incredibly humanizing. It's incredibly vulnerable, and I've seen families across Denver really dig in and do that because nobody was coming for our aid. Nobody was coming to help, and so we had to figure out as a community what everyone was capable of providing, and that they did. And when we first started seeing arrivals from Texas, the buses from Texas, it was in winter. It was in the middle of December. These were folks that did not come with coats. They may have been wearing the same shoes that they wore traveling through 7 or 8 different countries. And so they needed basic things, and this community has stepped up. And so I think in doing that, you're deciding to help another human being in a path that they're on. And that takes a little bit of courage. And so it is that, and then it's starting to see those folks get angry at the situation that these immigrants find themselves in, angry at the broken immigration system that we've talked about for decades, and start to actually want to do something about that. And so we've seen that mobilization happen here in Denver.
My name's Jon Mottern. I am a Denver resident for the past 11 years. I'm a dad, I'm a husband, and I'm a local realtor here. I'd often drive from my side of town down Spear Boulevard to my Cherry Creek office for sales meetings every Wednesday. All of a sudden, right before you get to I-25 on the right where that hotel is, like this huge camp popped up. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know newcomers were coming to the city, migrants. I wasn't really aware of the issue or how fast it was kind of approaching Denver. And so I was like talking to some other friends in the area, and I was like, hey, what's going on over here? Have you seen this? And they're like, yeah, it's the Venezuelans. So every time I would drive by, I'd start to really notice, okay, these guys are trying to like wash my windshield. I was like, oh my gosh, like this is at my doorstep. This is my problem now. Like, where do you even start? And so I just stopped the car and pulled over, and I found a guy saying that he was from Colombia and he needed work and he was living in a car. Kind of talked to him. 2 other guys quickly approached, and I started seeing like more people approach, and I was like, all right, you 3 in the car, let's just go. And they just carried rakes, they had signs, and I was like, we'll just see where this goes. So I knew I needed my yard raked, that's it. How are we gonna react? I don't know. My buddy used to always say, I had a friend from AA, I've been in AA for years, and he would always say in meetings like, you know, love is always the appropriate response. And I think about that sometimes, like when we are responding to situations, and especially this huge one, like, okay, well, how do I want to respond to this situation? Do I just keep driving past it? Do I get mad at it and yell at the governor or the mayor to get rid of it? Or do I just like try to show up? And like, what if a lot of people showed up that way? What would happen? And I quickly realized there were a lot of people showing up with that response, and it was really cool. So all of a sudden I'm in the car and I'm like, okay, we have to figure out how to communicate. Nobody speaks English. I speak English, they all speak Spanish, and my Spanish is muy mal, terrible. So I'm driving now and I've got Google Translate on the browser. We're kind of like talking about a million topics at once, and I'm asking lots of questions and who they are and where they're from and what's going on and what they need, right? Like, what do they need? What's up with the camp? What do you need at the camp? And we're just kind of getting to know each other and driving to my house. I get out my notepad that I use for work. So I'm like, I've got all these listing notes, right? I flip the page and it's like, all right, well, here's my profile on Ramon. And I start like, what are your skills? What do you do? What do you want to do? What have you done in the past? And kind of taking those notes for all 3 guys. It was very intuitive that I think the greatest gift I could give them was like access to my community. Like, I can't just fund everything for their lives going forward, but if I just like was generous with like my contacts and my community, that maybe we could all hire them and we could all find a solution for them. I just always see how much my kids have and how much we have as a family, and like, I don't want to say guilt, but it's just like, man, like we can give something back. Like we were so provided for, we have so much. And not only that, now I have time to help. And so I spent a lot of time just kind of introducing them to my community, my friends, other realtors. That was a big thing. I started blasting them to my realtor networks, and then people started using them to get their listings ready, do yard work. With their permission, I took pictures of them doing yard work, and I kind of built out these little profiles on each of them, and I was like, hey, so I went to my Discord channel. It's like Slack, which I'm sure most people are familiar with. And I put on there, I was like, hey, if anybody needs yard workers, like here's Ramon, and here are these guys, and use them, and here's their number, and here's their WhatsApp or their phone number if they had one. Most of them we just talked on Facebook, but that was kind of the start to it. It was so messy because nobody had a car. So I'd be driving them all over the city. We'd have mulch dropped off at this house, and like, okay, well, we got to get the guys there. What tools are needed? And just kind of, I don't know, figuring it out. It's changed. We were doing that. I also got them involved. They would help me organize like tables where we'd give out medicine, clothes, food to kind of the shelters that were in need the most. And so they'd come help, which was great because they spoke Spanish, and they also just kind of related to the community. So instead of kind of me just yelling a bunch of words that nobody understood, they were able to integrate with the community and find out what people needed and get the stuff to the people that needed it. And so that was all very macro and big. And so since then, we've kind of whittled down, and it's become more just like involvement with this like singular family. It was 3 guys. The one guy got a job, got an apartment, and was like, I don't really need the help anymore. And that was great. And he's off doing his thing. His name's Anderson. He came from Colombia. And then there were 2 other guys, and the one kind of started working with a realtor that I know and their family, and he's employed, got an apartment, and kind of settled. And then I've kind of stayed with this other family. And it's become much more just kind of personal one-on-one with this family versus trying to help like a million people. And that's really all I've kind of had the capacity for in the past few months. Yuri and Ramon and their 3 kiddos, they left Venezuela 8 years ago for Colombia, and they worked in Colombia for a long time while there was still work there. As inflation and other economic pressures grew and their health declined, they decided to save up money and make the long, very dangerous journey to the United States. And I don't know all of the details of that journey. Sometimes I'm afraid to ask. Honestly, I've asked some questions, and just the look in Yuri's face, like, I don't want to ask any more questions. I don't know if it's she doesn't want to talk about it or it's too much to recount, but it was clearly a very dangerous and long journey for her and her kids. I've seen some crazy pictures of their family on top of trains, like going across the desert and other stuff. They were driven by necessity. We're at a watering hole. There's more water here than there is there, and there's always going to be people moving towards the water. And we would do the same. And I think the right to work kind of acutely as like, okay, I worked for your company and now I want to go do this thing on my own, and it's what you did as well, but I have the right to work, so I can start my own company. And there's like all these laws protecting American citizens about like starting your own business or having the right to work. These guys, they're just doing it under the table. It just seems like if we could get them on the books, all they want to do is work. And I don't know why there's such a huge blockade to that. It started first in the Wheat Ridge neighbors page, because Wheat Ridge was really afraid of inheriting Denver's problem, as they labeled it. And so there was this unofficial town hall. There was all this fear mongering around it. And I kind of online interjected and was like, hey guys, like, here's the Highlands Moms Group response to the migration crisis. They created this whole organization and flowchart and spreadsheets about how to help, where the resources should go and how to distribute them. And it was just such a beautiful coming together of the community in response to it. And so that was kind of how I met that opposition in Wheat Ridge. A lot of people kind of got behind my comments and were like, oh yeah, we'd be happy to help. Let me know where to kind of point some resources. I feel like I was an underdog coming up. I was a very troubled teenager, and people helped me. And then when I kind of got into a position where I could help other people, that was always the message, especially in those rooms, was kind of like, you know, you'll never get as much in this life as you will when you're giving to someone else. I think the fear goes away really quickly when you just start talking or sharing a meal. And, you know, something really practical that you can do is just go meet one of these families, find out what they need, and keep it very micro. I think we can approach like one-on-one and just figure out what people need, and it becomes a lot more manageable.
Mari Chirinos, de Venezuela. Cuando salí el año pasado. Fue un proceso, pero le doy las gracias a Dios por lo que ya estoy en este país. Me demoré para entrar, sí. Me demoré 8 meses en Juárez, Ciudad Juárez, para poder cruzar. Pero para qué, me trataron bien. Y gracias a Dios ya estoy acá, pero no fue nada fácil. Lo importante es que se logró, aunque no es como pensábamos, pero no venía ciega a este país. Siempre los primeros meses, los primeros años son duros de acomodarse, pero gracias a Dios lo importante es que tenemos vida y salud y Dios no nos ha abandonado en ningún momento. Fue duro, pero no es imposible. Mientras haya fe, nada es imposible en esta vida. Que era para adelante y era para adelante. Con mi familia, mis tías, mis primos, mi esposo, mis cuñados. Una experiencia que no se le desearía a nadie de vivirla, pero si toca vivirla es parte de un proceso, que más adelante tendrá su recompensa. Porque no hay victoria si no hay proceso, y no hay victoria si no hay lágrimas. Todo en la vida tiene un propósito. Cuando llegamos a Juárez nos entregamos, me deportaron para atrás. Mi primer intento me devolvieron, sí, me volvieron para Torreón, otra vez para México. Y estaba con mi primo porque ya mi tía y su familia ya habían entrado. Mi prima se mira a su alrededor y no me ve porque ya venía en otro Jeep atrás. Se la sacaron a ella y después a mí. Y me dice, ¿qué vamos a hacer? Para adelante. Atrás ni para coger impulso, nadita voy a hacer para atrás. Ir con las manos vacías para atrás, no. Nos volvimos a montar en el tren y llegamos para la victoria de Dios, llegamos en Ciudad Juárez sola, con él. Hubo un mexicano que nos apoyó, ¿para qué? Un ángel que Dios nos mandó hasta el último momento que entramos. Nos apoyó bastante, nos dio una casa, les dio empleo. No estábamos, pero teníamos el techo, la comida y esperando el tiempo de él. Hasta que lo volvimos a intentar otra vez, tratamos de entrar como que por ilegales, no se dio, no era el tiempo, no era el momento y no podíamos forzar las cosas. Hubo uno que mi primo viene y dice, yo me voy a devolver. Yo le dije, Dios no me va a dejar a mí en vergüenza y no nos va a dejar. Si permitió que otras personas pasaran, nosotros también. Porque no, Él nos libró de tantos peligros en el camino para dejarnos en vergüenza en toda la orilla. Él cumple lo que promete, sino hay que tener fe y paciencia. En menos de 15 días nos salió la cita CBP1, que es el parol. Para la gloria y la honra de Dios, entramos. Y ahorita ya estoy en mis trámites, estoy como quien dice, legal en el país. No 100%, pero tengo algo ya adelantado. No he podido meter el asilo, pero Él sabe cuándo lo iré a hacer. Yo no llegué primero aquí en Denver, llegué en El Paso, Texas. De ahí me fui para Nueva York. Tuve 15 días en un refugio, no veía resultados y no voy a estar pensando, vámonos para otro lado. Por aquí ya mi cuñado ya había entrado, estaba aquí. Ya de ahí nos salió el apartamento ahí mismo en el edificio. La señora vio mi necesidad, me ayudó. Y ya ahorita, gracias a Dios, estamos arrendados. No ha sido nada fácil Denver, pero no tengo empleo, pero mi esposo sí tiene. Para la gloria y la honra de Dios, la cabecilla del hogar, la que falto soy yo, pero es a su tiempo, no más a mi tiempo. Lo único que hay que seguir esperando, seguir tocando, que cualquier puerta se va a abrir. La menos que uno piensa, se abre. Y lo que hoy nos falta, mañana nos sobrará. Y mañana será mejor que el de hoy. Permiso me llegó como en marzo. Ya voy para el año aquí, ningún empleo. He aplicado en todo porque, como quien dice, hay que tocar puertas, porque acostada no me va a llegar en la casa, no me van a tocar la puerta y me van a decir aquí está el empleo. He ido aplicando, ha salido en oportunidades, pero lejos de Colorado, como quien dice en Colorado Springs. Y en la ubicación que yo estoy, no me permiten viajar hasta allá, por lo que responsabilidad para ellos y responsabilidad para mí para poder llegar puntual al trabajo. Tengo que esperar que salga alguno que me conforme a mi dirección, consiguiera el empleo. Hay organizaciones que ayudan. Hay veces que me preguntan qué idioma hablo, español. Entonces a lo mejor querrán preguntarme algo y no sabrán cómo preguntarme y que yo le entienda o ellos me entiendan a mí. No he tenido esas personas así. He hablado a personas que hablan bilingüe, sí. He ido para organizaciones para que me han tratado de maravilla, buscan las maneras de ayudarnos, de apoyarnos, de darnos algunas asesorías, de darnos hasta cursos de inglés. Mi sinceridad aquí en Denver, fue a este país fue a trabajar, obtener mi cosa en Venezuela y regresar a mi país. Ese es mi mayor sueño. De ya no es migrar. Sí, estoy en un país que muchos quisieran estar, pero no es mi felicidad. Mi felicidad es estar con mi familia. Solo Dios lo sabe. Lo único que yo le pido, que me dé lo que Él sabe que yo necesito y que yo puedo ayudar a otra persona. Y que me dé la oportunidad de volver a mi tierra y estar con mi familia. No es que mi familia esté incompleta. Ya se me ha muerto, mi papá se me murió en mi travesía. Sí, en mi travesía, en el trayecto que yo venía para Estados Unidos, ya él estaba aquí. Él falleció aquí, en Dallas, Texas. Y aquí le diagnosticaron un cáncer y falleció. Desde ahí de que me pasó esa experiencia, le pido a Dios que me dé vida y salud y volver a ver a mi mamá. Pero estoy en un país de oportunidades, sí. Pero mi país es mi país, esté como esté. Me siento orgullosa de ser venezolana, de ese país hermoso. Que si tengo amistades, no, mis amistades no están aquí en Denver. Están en Nueva York, en Chicago, Texas. Pero aquí solo mi familia. Mi tía con su esposo, mi prima, mis primos con su esposo, mi cuñado. Y mi tío está en Texas. Más amistades tengo, es más. Pero así como amistades, no. Conocidos de hola, ¿cómo estás? No sabes de un empleo, a dónde estén buscando, cualquier ayuda que ayuden a uno. Estoy buscando oportunidades que me ofrezcan alguna oportunidad de empleo, de cualquier, como quien dice, cualquier curso, cualquier organización que me ayude con mis trámites legales para estar más legal en el país. Que mi permiso me lo dieron fue por 1 año, a esperar si se permite renovarlo y que me ayuden con eso, con empleo, que ayuden a muchos venezolanos que sí en verdad venimos a este país para un mejor futuro.
We hope Humanize stories of immigrants moved and inspired you. Turn that feeling into support for PBS 12. Your donation helps us share more stories celebrating Colorado's diverse community. Learn more at pbs12.org/donate.